What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Today we're joined again by Randy Blaukat, and we're going to be breaking down the 2022 the Major League Fishing Redcrest event. It's going to be here in a couple of weeks, March 23rd through 27th on Grand Lake. Randy, you fished Grand Lake for over 30 years. Basically, lived on the lake as when you were younger, and so we're going to kind of try to break it down, talk about what's going to happen at Redcrest, and also kind of get into a little bit about the differences between the 5-fish format that you fish in like Bassmaster or these other tours versus the every fish counts Major League Fishing format where you just got to catch as many pound-and-a-half fish as possible. So we're going to get into all that, talk about what we think the winning pattern is going to be, and hopefully share some good info. But Randy, how's it going?
Just been super busy, Jonny. Just got done with that Lake of the Ozarks Toyota series about a week and a half ago. Been working on the Fish the Moment Lake Map breakdowns, taking care of kids, YouTubing. Just busy right now, man.
For sure. And I do
Getting
want
ready to leave in about a week. We got our Bassmaster Open at Lake Cherokee in Tennessee, so I got about another week before I leave for that or so.
That should be fun. Catching some big smallies down there.
Yeah.
Good deal. So before we jump into it, I do want to talk a little bit about the Lake of the Ozarks tournament and kind of talk some about that because you haven't been on for a while, and I know a lot of guys are happy to see you back. So we'll get a little bit of update there. Before we do that, obviously we got to jump into all of our sponsor stuff as usual. First up, got to give a big shout out to one of our sponsors, Bridgeford Beef Jerky is a great sponsor of the Fish Moment live stream and a great sponsor of bass fishing in general. They sponsor Randy, they sponsor the channel, and a lot of other great fishermen. If you guys are looking for a great snack to take to the lake and something that you can have easily in the glove box of your boat or just someplace that's out of the way, definitely check out some Bridgeford Beef Jerky. It's got some good protein in it if you want to make sure you're getting your protein in, and just a great snack all around. So definitely check it out, guys, and you can find it at Walmart, Dollar General, at most gas stations as well. So definitely check that out. Another company that sponsors the Fish the Moment live stream and the podcast is the Bass Tank. The Bass Tank are the premier bass fishing electronics installation company in the country. They are based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they have some really awesome deals going on right now. They just got a massive inventory in with a lot of different products. I actually just saw today that they got the Humminbird Mega Live in. I don't even know if they still have them in stock. They posted it earlier today on their social media, but you can definitely check them out over at thebasstank.com. Go over to the different brands, and you can see if you can get that. There you go. Got the Humminbird Mega Live. So if you guys have been trying to get the Mega Live, it is in stock and available at the Bass Tank. Definitely head over there and check it out. Supplies are not going to last long, and I did do a review of the Humminbird Mega Live about 6 months ago with one of the initial products, if you want to check that out on the main Fish the Moment channel. And I've heard that they've made some improvements to it since I tested it as well, so definitely check that out if you have Humminbird units and you want to give it a shot. All of that can be found at thebasstank.com, or you can just give them a call at their number, which is 918-509-7864. Again, that's 918-509-7864. Good deal. So, Randy, let's jump into a little bit of a discussion about your Lake of the Ozarks tournament. I saw some stuff. You guys probably know what's coming. A lot of live scopes, a lot of Alabama rigs, a lot of jerk baits. Give us kind of a rundown of how that tournament went.
Well, it was exactly how I was expected. I mean, I knew it was going to get one live scope with an Alabama rig. I mean, that's just the way it is up there that time of year. But conditions were pretty similar, really, to the way it was last year, except we didn't have as much ice on the lake. But the water was cold. In practice, the water temperatures were 37, 38 degrees. And in the tournament, they warmed up 41, 42 degrees, something like that. But there was more fish caught than what I thought. You know, the first day, I think I was in like 42nd or 43rd place out of 170 some with almost 12 pounds. And the year before that, I think 7 pounds was the top 40. And the conditions were similar. So that first day really shocked me about the weights that they had. And I think a lot of it, I think a lot of guys figured out how to use live scope and live target. I mean, everybody I talked to that caught the good bags, they were just randomly working their way through coves and, you know, just live scoping through there. And I think that's one of the big reasons that it, you know, was so, you know, much higher weights, but I caught mine just fishing megabass jerk baits just around Main Lake Points, just blind fishing with jerk baits. Second day I only had 4, so I finished 60th or 62nd in the tournament, I think. So didn't get killed, but it was not as the finish I was looking forward to.
Gotcha. And I do have some new info to share. One of my buddies, actually, who I fished with in the past, he finished in the top 10 in that tournament. And just reading through some of the articles, knowing kind of how he fished, I can kind of give an idea of how these guys were catching him in that tournament. And I'd love to get your input, too, on this because it's pretty interesting. Basically, he lives kind of in my area, and he said he drove up to Lake of the Ozarks for like 3 weekends in a row and spent over 30 hours just idling. And all he did in practice was idle the lower end of the lake every inch he could, finding brush piles and little rocky veins. And he just basically had, probably 100 different brush piles that he marked in practice. So he just idled. He didn't even fish because he knew that's how the tournament was won the year before. So he just covered a massive area of Lake of the Ozarks, spent 30 hours just graphing. And then tournament day, he pulled up and he just started fishing those brush piles that he had marked with the live scope and the Alabama rig. He threw the Alabama rig, threw it over the top of brush piles, and ran as many brush piles as he possibly could on these points, just anywhere he could find a brush pile. And there was a ton of guys doing this, but he was able to kind of have the advantage because a lot of guys came down here and they had like maybe 20 brush piles marked. Well, when there are 30 boats fishing down this part of the lake, it's tough to actually get on a spot because if you only have 20 brush piles, there's a chance that there's 20 boats already sitting on them unless you have an early boat draw. So he basically went and tried to just get as many spots as possible to run, and he was able to run enough of them. I think he had 21 pounds one of the days and then had 15 or 16 the next couple days. So that was kind of the deal. It was, the anti-Randy tournament, which is graph for 30 hours on the big engine and then live scoped him with an Alabama rig.
Yeah, it's sort of funny because, even 10 or 15 years ago, I mean, none of those fish would have been caught. Those fish would have just been swimming out there undisturbed. So that's one of the reasons you see such a separation in these tournaments anymore. A lot of the live scoping tournaments, which I'm guessing over 90% of the tournaments now are won with some element of live scope involved. But you see such a big separation between the top weights and the bottom weights now because those guys that have gotten good with it and figured it out. I mean, it's just like they're catching fish that nobody knows they're there. I mean, before.
Yeah, that's the thing that's crazy that obviously fishing brush piles offshore with Alabama rigs is actually, I did that to catch my personal best bass. I have a video out on my YouTube channel 3 or 4 years ago, and that was 2 years before I got the live scopes. This is something I've been doing for years now, and I've been catching fish over the top of brush piles with Alabama rigs since I was 17 years old, so almost at this point 10 years I've been doing that. So it's not like it's necessarily a new thing that guys are doing, but you can just be a lot more effective with the live scope. And I think the big thing I found with it is that it's making offshore fishing more accessible to people who aren't that great at their electronics. What they can do is they can graph over a brush pile, see that there's a brush pile there on their side imaging or down imaging, but they don't have to know if there's actually fish in it. Then they can just spin around, drop the live scope, and see that the fish are down there because it's much easier to interpret. Well, myself, I was able to actually figure out if the brush piles had fish in them using side imaging and down imaging, which is still, you can do it, but it's harder to do. And that's why not that many guys were ever doing that. But I would do that in tournaments and do really well when I was fishing tournaments back in college and high school and stuff. And I've been doing that for 10 years. But I think that the live scope is so much easier for the average angler to get their head around, to figure out, oh, that's a fish, this is what's going on the screen, that's why guys are being more successful with it. It just made offshore fishing and knowing a fish are there so much easier without as much effort, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So it's I wasn't on the live stream last week, but you guys were talking about Jason Christie winning the Classic, and I didn't get to see any of the coverage on the Classic except right at the end of the last day. I saw Jason Christie pitch a jig behind a shallow dock. And I'm going, all right, Jason won the tournament, old school flipping a jig on shallow docks. I didn't realize he was live scoping to catch most of his fish. It's like he talked about something, oh, dang it, it's like, so.
Yeah, he was doing the combo deal there. But anyways, well, let's jump into the main topic here, Andy. Get into the meat of it, and that is breaking down the Redcrest over on Grand Lake this upcoming week. And what I'm going to do, guys, I'm just going to give you a general overview of Grand Lake. Fortunately, Randy and I live pretty close to Grand Lake, so we know this lake pretty well. Randy a lot better than I do. And I want to give a general overview first for those who may be unfamiliar, give you guys kind of a rundown, and then I'll let Randy kind of give a breakdown of it as well. So, and maybe if you want to have Google Earth pulled up as well, Randy, on your end, just while I'm talking through on this, and then after I'm done, you can share your screen and walk people through it. But basically, Grand Lake is part of the Neosho River. It's kind of a river-ish lake. There's current that runs through it. You got dirty water on the upper end up here. You have clear water on the lower end. And Grand Lake is not necessarily known for producing numbers of fish. Yes, you can have days where you can catch 30, 40, 50 fish a day, and there's a lot of guys that do that. But in general, if you look at a lot of the tournaments, especially after you get a lot of pressure on these lakes, a lot of guys, like there was a Bassmaster Open this past year on Grand, they were struggling to put 3 or 4 keepers in the boat. And then there was also a tournament from the FLW Tour in 2019, which is one of the last more recent tournaments on Grand in the spring, where I think like a third of the field zeroed on the first day. And like I think there were only like 20 or 30 limits out of like 200 boats brought in. So it can be a very challenging lake, but you can also get some really big weights in this tournament. You can have guys, catching, 4, 5, 6 pounders. And if you get on the right deal, for example, like Edwin Evers did in a classic a while back in the back of I think it's Elk River back in here. He was back in this area in some of these laydowns, and he had, a bunch of 6 and 7 pounders, had 29 pounds for 5 fish, and caught a bunch of other fish. So you can land on him, and you could have a guy's, have 30 bass for, 90 pounds. It's possible. So Grand Lake has the high-end potential, but it's not necessarily known for that. And it's, again, more of a top-heavy lake. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how these guys handle this. We're going to kind of break down the key areas that we want to focus, that we would be focusing on if we were in this tournament, and then we'll also kind of get into some other stuff about how to tackle this lake for 5 fish versus a bunch of fish. But that was kind of my general overview, Randy. I'll let you kind of take it over since you have more experience and just kind of break down this lake for us a little bit.
Yeah, let me share the screen there, Jonny, with you here.
Yep.
Okay, you got it on?
Yep, I got
See it on there?
Yep.
Well, here's sort of the deal, guys. This tournament, it's the end of March, so they are hitting it at the prime time. I mean, I'm guessing the mid March, the first week of April, is the best time to fish Grand Lake. There's more big fish up shallow that time of year than any other time, so they've hit absolutely perfect. Another thing in this tournament that's going to be a big factor that you don't see in other tournaments, it's a small field. And Grand Lake, it's a big lake, but it fishes tiny. So they've got a huge advantage of being able to fish Grand with a very small field. I mean, it's a massive advantage from that end. So there's a couple different things that are going on. In my opinion, you can pretty much count off much of the lake sort of above the mouth of Elk River. There may be some fish caught up in these pockets, but normally the Spring River and the Neosho River is not that good this time of year. The primary areas in this tournament are going to be Elk River, Honey Creek right here, parts of Horse Creek right here, and then some of the lower end areas like Drowning Creek and Duck Creek here. The lake's going to fish. You're going to be able to catch them all over the lake, depending upon the water clarity and the water temperature. Now, if they get a bunch of rain down there and flushes the lake out, the mid part of the lake is not going to be near as productive as the lower end. Which is common. I mean, if they get the lake comes up 2 or 3 feet and gets dirty, which I've seen it super dirty that time of year, you can pretty much ride off a lot of this area right here, and then the main creeks are going to be the predominant thing. But from my perspective in this tournament, there's going to be several different things going on. This isn't going to be a tournament where you're going to see these guys go through a ton of fish. I mean, Grand Lake is not a numbers lake. I mean, even at its best, it's not a numbers lake. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these guys out there, I mean, if they get 5 to 8 bites a day, that's going to be pretty good. I mean, that's going to be a pretty good day. It's not like you're going to go out there and just jack them everywhere you fish, unless you have a situation where you got really stable weather and the water temperatures are in the mid 50s and there's a lot of good shallow, then it could be some really good weights. But in my opinion, it's going to fish the whole lake. I mean, you're going to be able to catch them all over through this part of the lake right here. And the fish are going to be everywhere. Let me pull up Duck Creek here and sort of give you an example of what I'm talking about. In March at Grand, you will be able to catch them, and you could do good literally anywhere in this creek here. You could be in the upper end of Duck Creek back here fishing isolated shallow laydowns and shallow water. You could move up here and you could start fishing, some of the pockets off the main creek, go back in the pockets and flip around the last few docks. You could be fishing some of the rock transition areas on the main creek. You could be live scoping with an Alabama rig down the middle of the guts in these coves over here. A lot of different options to that. So from that standpoint, there's going to be a lot of things going on in the tournament.
Now, I think that's pretty interesting, given that there's so many different options. And obviously, being in kind of the end of March, we've had pretty stable weather in our area. We actually had snow this past weekend, so I say stable. Hasn't been that stable, but it's going to be stable. It snowed literally on Sunday, 2 days ago, or Saturday. We had like a foot of snow here. And then 2 weeks before that, we also had snow. But then in between those two snowy periods, we've had 70-degree weather. And it's going to be 70 degrees on Wednesday, tomorrow. So the weather's all over the place right now, but I think it's going to be somewhat stable leading up to the next week. So those water temperatures right now are probably, I was on a lake that was one lake down from Grand Lake this past weekend, and water temperatures are between 46 and 48 degrees. But it's probably going to be a little bit colder because of all of the snow that's melted off, and then it's going to warm up. So we're probably looking at low to mid 50-degree water temperatures would be my guess for this tournament, which could be absolutely perfect. They also could hit it like maybe the first couple days of the tournament, it's not as good and it's really good at the end, or we could have another freaking snowstorm and it could throw the whole thing off again completely. So it's kind of tricky in that perspective. But one thing that I think is a wild card in this tournament, I want to get your opinion on this too, Randy. Can you see my screen? I don't know if you're able to see what I'm showing here.
I can't see it from here.
Oh, okay. Let me actually then pull this up. I'm going to share my screen here, and then that way you can see me too. There we go.
Yep.
Give it a second, guys. Sorry, I want Randy to be able to see what I'm talking about, so that way we got it all going. Okay, there we go. Let me transition this over here. Okay. Turn this off. Sorry, guys. Kind of clunky sometimes with the with everything, but we're making it do. So, anyways, there we go. So, got Grand Lake here, Andy, and basically, what I would expect from Grand, if you're really wanting to think about where these guys are going to have a chance to hammer them, I think that a lot of these guys are going to initially just start beating these banks. And like if you go into Honey Creek, there's a lot of short pockets and coves, and it seems like normally in the first couple days of these tournaments, guys can just run down these shallow pockets and just pick off the fish they're moving in, and you can normally have a pretty decent day just picking off the shallow fish just in pockets, throwing square bills, spinner baits, your average stuff. The problem is that after 2 days of guys pounding on these same fish, I think that we're gonna basically the way the Redcrest works, at least from the way I remember it, is that there's multiple stages to it. So the first couple stages, I think it's going to be pretty much just a shallow flipping spinnerbait crankbait deal. And that's kind of the start of the tournament. I think guys are just going to pick off the easy fish back in these pockets and creeks. I think the wild card is going to be guys who know the lake well enough to find less pressured fish. And there are a few places I can think of off the top of my head that always receive a little bit of less pressure here on Grand. And one of those areas in particular, I remember Edwin Evers going to a few years ago, and this could be like a wild card, is he actually, during the Bassmaster Classic, ran up in here the second day of the Bassmaster Classic that he won, and he caught them flipping down like some of these roads in here, way up the river. Now, these are not normally fish you would fish in a regular tournament, and I'm sure you can kind of back me up on that, Randy. These aren't normally your tournament fish. But could a guy get up here if the water temperature is a little bit warmer up in some of these backwater creeks and stuff? Could they find a wad of 1.5 pound males that have moved up and just catch like 50 males off of like an area way up the river up here? That's kind of my first question to you.
I don't think so, Johnny. I don't think you have the population of fish biting, especially that time of year up there. That really surprised me. Edwin caught him up there that early in the year. Out of all the years, I used to fish this area right here you're showing constantly because it was so close to Joplin. That's only like 25 miles from Joplin where I grew up at. So I fished everything in that area for years, and I just never caught that many up in there like you're talking about. I don't see it happening up there myself.
Gotcha. Okay, because that's one of the things I was thinking about. Because one of the things I do on the Arkansas River a lot, Randy, is I get into like these shallow backwaters where you can like kind of cut in here, and if all this stuff is warming up back in here, and some of these like shallow cuts and stuff, if there's bass in these things, I could see a guy getting one of these all to himself because all the other creeks and stuff are so much more notorious. And I guess in my brain, it's like this is the off-the-wall kind of stuff that it might take to win, especially a guy, if he finds some up here, maybe even saves it for a couple days and comes the last day of the tournament and just smashes them out of one of these sloughs. The problem with these sloughs, like a slough like this or anything like that, is that, one, getting into them can kind of be a tricky situation, but that's not as big of a deal for these guys. The bigger problem is, where in these sloughs are you going to have a group of fish? Because you could spend 2.5 days of practice and not cover all of these little tiny sloughs way up the river up here. It takes a long time to work through them all. But I know from personal experience, I have some lakes in my area that set up like this in central Arkansas that I've had days where I've pulled back into a slough like this, and just in one little patch, like right in here, literally every single cast, you can just catch them on a Senko or like a tube or something, and it's just easy, and they're everywhere. And they're not big ones, they're 1.5-pounders. But if you can get on a pile of 1.5-pound fish, that's just as good in this tournament as a, 2 4-pounders versus, or 1 4-pounder is the same as catching 3 1.5-pounders. So that's kind of, that's at least my thought.
Here's my prediction on this, Johnny, because it has a lot to do with the format on the tournament. If this was a normal 5-fish limit type tournament, and I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here real quick. I'll show you guys.
Let me stop sharing real quick. And I see over here, I see Kevin. You're saying, let me stop sharing 1 second, Randy.
Okay.
I'm seeing you say it caught 20. Take 20 pounds to win. That 20 pounds can be deceiving, Kevin. I will say, because in this every fish counts format, that guy, the guys who caught that could have just caught 5 really good fish, and that's all they caught that whole day. They caught 5 good ones. And Randy, I want you to comment this on too before you get into what you're talking about. There's Kevin over here says that it's been 20 plus pounds the last few tournaments. There's a couple things that go into that right now, Randy. One, if the Alabama rig is allowed in those tournaments, those are probably Alabama rig fish, and you can't throw the Alabama rig in the Major League Fishing. So that's a whole thing right there where a lot of those 20 plus pound bags are Alabama rig fish, and those fish will not be caught in this tournament. The other thing about that is that, again, those guys might get 5 bites and they landed on the right spot and they caught 5 big fish and it's 20 pounds. But with this format, 5 fish for 20 pounds, if they only got 5 bites all day doing that, which is very typical on Grand, that's not going to do you any good if a guy lands on the spot where he can catch 40 1.5-pounders. He's going to blow the other guy away by 40 pounds. So I think a lot of the standard techniques that guys are using in, like, let's say the Nichols Trail or all the local tournament trails where you go and just like throw a spinnerbait down the bank or like go for those 5 big bites a day, those patterns just might not be that effective in this style of tournament. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Johnny. And here's the deal with this particular tournament, and minus the Alabama rig. If this was a traditional 5-fish limit tournament on Grand Lake, the last week of March like this, under normal conditions, the tournament would get one either on a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait, a big bladed spinnerbait, or chatterbait. 90%, I'm 90% sure of that if the Alabama rig wasn't legal to use. My prediction in this tournament, and you guys can hold me to it after the tournament, we'll get on here and we'll see if my prediction comes true. This tournament is going to get one on a combination of a jerkbait and a crankbait, because you're going to have those are the two baits that's going to catch your numbers of fish here. And you wouldn't win on that under normal circumstances, but you can catch 2 to 3 times the amount of fish on a jerkbait and a crankbait than you can any other technique that time of year. The jerkbait fish don't run big, but you can catch, 2, 3 pound, 2.5 pounders, 2 pounders on it quite a bit. Same with the crankbait fish. Here's what we're looking at right here, what I'm talking about. See this area here? I'm going to give you guys a secret spot. This little point right here, I probably caught 30 bass in March, over 4 pounds on it since I was 17 years old back in the 1970s. This is the type of stuff they get on in March. You roll into a place like this, they're on this little bitty subtle secondary points, or even like this one right here, everything else is going to be dead in here. So a guy that knows how to run pre-spawn subtle stuff at Grand Lake can run hundreds of this type of stuff in a day's fishing with the crankbait and the jerkbait and catch a lot of fish. So that's sort of the unique thing about this, and it also goes down on the lower end of the lake. I mean, here's my prediction in the tournament where it's going to get one, how it's going to get one, is I think this tournament is going to get one on a jerkbait in this part of the lake right here, maybe a crankbait, maybe, jerkbait secondary points, some of the transition banks, and then maybe get back into some of the pockets on some steeper banks and parallel them with like a crawdad crankbait or shad pattern crankbait. Those are going to be the two techniques that produce the numbers of fish here that win the tournament. And like I said, if it wasn't for that, I'd put a big spinnerbait in my hand and chatterbait, not take it out. But you can catch them doing that, but I don't think you can catch enough to win doing that.
Okay, so your call is jerkbait, secondary points, lower end of the lake.
Yep, and crankbait.
Okay, and crankbait.
But
okay.
Shallow crankbait, like a square bill or some type of a 4 to 6 foot runner, that type of deal.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I'm going to make my prediction because we're making predictions. I'm going to share my screen back here, Andy. Let me. If you could stop sharing, yeah, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. There we go. Get this pulled back up. Okay, so here's my prediction. Since I don't have much experience out here, Randy, I get to make 2 predictions just because you have more experience on Grand Lake. I think that's a fair fight. I don't know if that's fair or not, but I'm going to do it anyways. I have 2 predictions of how this tournament is going to get won. Prediction number 1 is it's going to be a guy going way up the river. This is my off the wall, I think it could happen. Someone's going to figure it out up this river, because you basically in the beginning wrote this area off. So I'm thinking one of these backwaters. I know there's guys out there that like fishing this type of stuff. I think that a wild card is the guy's going to get up here and he's going to get in the dink fest, going to go find those 1.5 to 2 pounders and just hammer them on a Senko, flipping, chatterbaiting, just shallow water. And
is it a 2 pound limit in the tournament?
Pound and a half.
What can they win? Pound and a half. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that, at least that's what I think. I may be wrong on that actually, but I think it's pound and a half. So we're gonna do pound and a half, I think. And so that's what I would bet. Even a 2 pound, you may still be good enough up here. So that's my number 1 option that I think could potentially happen. The second thing I think they could get one on, and this is a little bit trickier, but I think that there's going to be a pattern on the lower end of this lake where Randy was talking about in that clear water, and there's going to be a guy who catches them jerkbaiting the boat windbreaks like this and the railings that run in from the boat docks. And you know what I'm talking about, Randy, with these railings, right? Mm-hmm. Trying to find a good example of them. There's these little basically windbreak things here that are around these secondary points, more suspended, and then around some of these boat docks, there are these railings. I need to find I think I can't think of one on the lower end, but there are a bunch of them if you can find them. I know there's one over here that I can at least show you guys. Where am I? I'm struggling to find this. Let me take the lake down a little bit. I want to show you guys what I'm talking about because this is kind of a deal. Oh man, I can't find now. You know, you could find these things in a heartbeat, Randy. Normally, when you're not on a live stream, but the second that you're on a live stream, it's like you can't find one to save your life. But basically, what it is, guys, is it's these little railings that stick out from these boat docks where guys actually use them to launch their boats. And I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but it's basically these boat launch.
There's a bunch of them, Jonny. Just if you go to, you know where we launched there by the dam on the East Spillway, there's a bunch of them just right there.
Oh, right here?
Go down to the right there, away from the dam area, down that bank. There's a bunch of them.
There we go. Awesome. There. See, Randy knows this. So it's like the railroad ramps. These things, they're right up against the shoreline. And the nice thing about these, Randy, is guys can live scope them. So instead of having to go crank every single inch of the lake, they're close enough to the shore, they're attached to the bank, and they're not under the water, so it's not like a boat dock where you have to actually skip the boat docks and like get your bait underneath them. These fish, I remember that I talked to Matt Pangrak. Sorry, Matt, if I'm ruining your pattern, but he actually won like a Major League Fishing style, or did really well in a Major League Fishing style tournament on Grand, fishing these railway walkways with a jerkbait. And I think that if a guy could find enough of these on the lower end of the lake, he could pull up to them really fast, drop the live scope in the water, live scope them, see if there are fish there. If not, pull up the trolling motor, spin around, run to the next one, drop the trolling motor, and you can be so much more efficient on these things. And there's like hundreds of them on this lake. I didn't make that obvious by my lack of being able to find one right away, but there's so many of them. And I think that is a potential wild card. I think that's going to be, it's that, or it's going to be way up in those backwaters, I think is how it's going to get won. So that's my call. What do you think there, Randy?
You're right. If those fish are on those floats and the stuff like you're talking about, yeah, I would agree. It could definitely be one like that. But one of the things I found out about those type of structures on Grand, they're either on them or they're not. It's not like there's one here or one there. It's like they're either, you can run a solid pattern and catch fish on most any one of them, or they're just not on them at all. So that remains to be seen, but that's definitely an option there for sure.
For sure. By the way, got a great comment here from Old Man Cheney. He says, I call BS, Randy. It's either going to be a shad wrap in the dead center of the lake or dragging a bag of Bridgeford beef jerky. And love that comment. So that's actually going to be the winner of our Bridgeford beef jerky giveaway. I think that maybe that's something these guys need to be trying, dragging some Bridgeford beef jerky. Would that be considered live bait fishing, Randy? I don't know how that works with the rules.
It'd be like a pork frog, maybe.
Yeah, it's like pork.
Like hanging a pork frog. Yeah.
Maybe that's the secret that we haven't figured out yet, Randy, is dragging our Bridgeford beef jerky behind the boat. Last week we had a comment saying we need to have a blueback herring flavor of the beef jerky from Bridgeford. So maybe we can, make a little request over there to see if we can get that to happen. But Old Man Cheney, great comment there. Send us a message or an email over at info@fishthemoment.com. Again, that's info@fishthemoment.com. We'll send you a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky straight from Bridgeford's plant. Just email us and send us your mailing address, and we'll get that shipped out to you. Thanks again for Bridgeford for sponsoring the live stream. Good deal. So, in terms of the overall pressure on Grand, do you think that we're going to see the weights drop off over the course of the tournament, or do you think we're going to see a pretty consistent weight? Do you think there's going to be enough fish moving in and enough fish around with these, the last day there's only going to be 10 boats on the lake. So do you think those weights will be consistent, or do you think that after 4 days of guys or 5 days of guys fishing, they're really going to put a, beating on these fish?
Well, they're not going to put a beating on them with no bigger than the field, because how many people are in this tournament?
I think it's
like
only
30 or 20?
Yeah, it's not that many. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to put a beating on it. A lot of it depends on not necessarily the weather patterns and water temperature, but it really depends on the water level and how much flow is coming through the lake and how that has affected the water clarity in certain areas. I mean, the lake right now, it's pretty clear. But that can change. I mean, just with one bad front that comes through. So that's the deciding factor there. But overall, I don't look for it to be great. I look for, just like Grand is every single time, there's going to be a handful of guys that figure out the deal. They get the quality bites, and they're going to be catching 4-pounders. I mean, that's why it takes 20-pound plus to win every tournament at Grand Lake. But if you look down to what it takes for 50 or 60th place, it doesn't take squat. So that's notoriously the way Grand Lake is. And it's like any other place. Grand Lake has so many little subtleties to it. It's got so many little nooks and crannies and perks, and getting behind boat docks. And then, you may pull a dock that's got a brush pile into the walkway and catch a 6 or 7-pounder off of it. And then, fill your limit out beyond that. It's not a type of a lake that is real conducive to catching numbers of fish. And Grand Lake is not an easy lake to fish. Grand Lake is sort of like Lake of the Ozarks. It's a pretty difficult place to fish because most of the time, if you're not fishing in and around boat docks, you're not catching good ones. I mean, once in a while, you can catch some good fish, going down the bank. But unless you're offshore at different times of the year, if you're on the bank and you're not fishing around behind cables, fighting the docks, getting your boat scratched up around docks, you're not catching that much. That's why Grand Lake it's a bad lake to guide on, and it's a bad lake to try to fish 2 guys out of the boat, because the guy that's in front of the boat gets everything on a lake like Grand. But it's that's one of the things I've got sort of a love-hate affair with Grand Lake. I mean, I love it because it's where I cut my teeth fishing. I got so many good memories about it. But Grand Lake is not the same lake it was back in the day. Back when I fished the lake every single weekend back in the 80s, it was completely a different lake. I mean, shoreline habitat's different, fishing pressure is different, the way the fish use the water is different. So it's morphed into a lake that is just sort of a shadow of itself from what it was back in the early 80s.
And it's interesting.
The guy, if there's any...
Go ahead, Ray.
Well, if there's anyone that has fished the lake like myself back in the 70s and 80s, you guys know what I'm talking about, because it's not the same lake. I mean, it just really is, and it's really went downhill from that standpoint. And people have gotten so good at catching the fish down there. Grand Lake is one of those lakes that not only gets completely hammered, but it gets hammered by high quality tournament fishermen. It's different. There's a big difference between having fishing pressure on a lake and having really, really skilled angler fishing pressure. Grand Lake has got so many circuits and tours that fish the lake that are hammers. These guys are hammers that fish it. So there's nowhere for them to hide anymore, man. It's not.
Yeah, and that's something that's interesting. It's happened actually with one of my local lakes that I used to fish a lot growing up, was Lake Dardanelle. There's so many tournaments on Lake Dardanelle, so many tournament trails going out of there. Every regional tournament seems like always stops by Dardanelle. And I've talked to some of my buddies that fished there for years, and I've gone back several times. I used to fish, I fished 2 tournaments a week there every single summer. And I probably fished a minimum of 2 tournaments a month on Lake Dardanelle year-round for like 5 or 6 years. So I fished Dardanelle a ton, fished tournaments on Dardanelle a ton. And the thing about it is, going back there now, one, there was a fisheries biologist that basically said that it has completely gone the downturn in terms of fish quality and like just the number of fish that are in there, and it's just kind of a cycle. Certain lakes just go through those downturns. Now, Grand, luckily, hasn't gone through as much of a downturn. It's not as big of a downturn as like at Dardanelle. We're now on Lake Dardanelle. Like, when I was fishing out there, you had to have 18 to 20 pounds to even be competitive in tournaments, and a lot of times in the winter, you had to catch 25 to 26 pounds. Now, if you catch 12 pounds on Dardanelle, you are doing great. And that's with the A-rig. Like, it's hard to catch 12 pounds of fish. And that's like a huge drop-off. So Grand isn't quite there yet. But it is interesting how, some lakes just have those downturns. And one thing that I've talked to you about, Randy, that you said affected is the addition of the Wolf Creek boat ramp. And I wanted to get your opinion on what you think about, and I'll pull it up on my end. Wolf Creek, this is the major boat ramp that got put in where a lot of the tournaments go out of. the big thing about Wolf Creek is you can see right here, actually, in the old image, there was just a few boat slips here when they put it initially. Now, if you look at it, it's this massive thing. Look at the parking that they put here. There's so many parking spots to handle this, and they have, 6 ramps. It's massive. And all these fish get released in Wolf Creek. Do you think that there's going to be a guy who just says, screw it, I'm not even going to worry about doing anything else. I'm just going to hunker down in Wolf Creek and fish here for the entire tournament? I have a feeling there might be a guy who finishes in the top 5 in the event who never leaves the mouth of Wolf Creek the entire tournament. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to comment on the Wolf Creek facility here. So I won't make any fans here with the Grove Chamber of Commerce, but the Wolf Creek facility is the worst thing that ever happened to Grand Lake. Absolutely. The Chamber of Commerce doesn't have any type of regulations on the tournaments coming in. It's just like a free-for-all. And ever since that Wolf Creek ramp went in there, all you guys that fish the lake, you've seen a noticeable decline in the quality of fishing on Grand Lake. All the tournaments we used to go out of Red 11 Port, which is over there in Hickory Creek, just out across. And Red 11 was small. You get that many boats in there, and as a result, you just didn't have that many big tournaments at Grand Lake. There just was not that many. There was buddy tournaments and stuff like that, but there wasn't these big team circuits that you have now, and the big Bassmasters Classic and Bassmaster Opens and FLW Tours there. So that it's the quality fishing at Grand Lake has been severely impacted by the Wolf Creek facility. Now, given that, there's always somebody that finishes in the top 10 in Wolf Creek there, without a doubt. I mean, the thing about fishing for the retreads there in Wolf Creek, and I don't mean just by the ramp there, but I'm talking about within a mile or so from the ramp, is that you may have 25 guys fishing there, and they always do, and there will be one boat that does good that finishes in the top 10 or wins the tournament out of there. So, yeah, there's definitely that's going to play in the tournament for sure, especially if that water temperature is in the mid-50s. Because that part of the lake has got a lot more stained water, and those fish usually don't start firing good until the water temperature starts getting into the mid to upper 50s. There's probably more quality fish in the lake, in that part of the lake, than anywhere, but a lot of those fish are on their way out. They get released out of Wolf Creek. They start filtering out. All that stuff gets hammered around Sailboat Bridge. It's not the same as it used to be. The entire area is a community hole, but given that, it could get won there. I mean, you're right, Jonny. I mean, it could get won by somebody that puts the trolling motor down at the ramp and just farts around there back and forth all day long. In the last FLW we fished there, I caught. Let me show you guys. Let me share my screen here.
Yeah,
you guys.
While Randy's doing that, I'm actually going to look up a few things. So I'm paying attention to what Randy's talking about too, but I'm also trying to do some research to give you more info. So,
well, I'll give you guys an example here what I'm talking about. The last FLW, the one 2 years before that, I did pretty good in the tournament, and every day of the tournament, get over here, find this place here. Every day here's the Wolf Creek facility right here, and the off limits was right, this break wall right here, that was the off limits. I pulled up right here on this bank here, and I caught a limit every morning of the tournament on my way out, just on that bank right there. So this is the type of stuff that works. I mean, all the docks along this area here, every place on both sides of the lake, the little bay in here, all these flat nothing stuff. So, yeah, that's definitely going to be a factor in the tournament. But I was saying for you guys that didn't know, all the tournaments used to go out right over here at Red 11 for years. They got just a tiny little facility. It hadn't changed much at all. It's still right here. But this ramp right here, there's the parking lot there. This is where all the tournaments of the lake went out before the Wolf Creek facility got put in there. So you can see the impact that it's had on it.
For sure. And one thing that you're going to see too, I'm actually going to share my screen here again, Randy, with you. We're just switching back and forth on the screen share deal. I pulled up the Major League Fish or the Nichols Marine Team Trail, which is one of the biggest team trails in this area. They give away a boat and everything, so a lot of guys fish it. And this is the result. These are the results. So Grand's fishing really well. You got let's see here, first place here, 23 pounds. Second place 21, 21, 20, 19, 19, 19. So top 7 was 19 pounds. To make the top 50 or top 10 cut was 18 pounds. 20th place is 16
that's
pounds.
big weight.
So I mean, it's good, but it's also, I mean, March pre-spawn. I mean, it's pretty good. But the thing is going deep. I mean, 100th place is 9 pounds for 3 fish. That's not bad. And if you go, where's the 15-pound break here? 15 pounds got you 36th place. So that's pretty solid weight-wise. If you still look at some of these guys, even they're catching, still only catching 4 fish for, 15 pounds. So it's not like all these guys are catching limits even. They're just catching quality. And that's a lot of times what happens here on Grand. And obviously it's team tournaments, so 2 guys fishing. These are also the best anglers in the lake. They practice and stuff like that. But that's also one thing to think about is, go ahead, Randy.
Well, yeah, that's about as good as it gets right there. And that's what you have when you have some stable weather conditions. And you have the lake that is pretty fishable all over with the water's clear. Yep. I'm sure a lot of those bags were caught Alabama rigging with live scope. I guarantee it. Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of the A-rig fish, it's pretty easy on Grand to just roll down the bank with the A-rig and catch, 12 to 13 pounds, honestly. It's not rocket science. Even just picking up a spinnerbait sometimes on Grand, the difference is the guys who are catching the 20 to 23 pounds, that's like, or even like that, making the 17-pound jump, that's pretty big time there to still catch them. And one thing you have to think about is this is a major tournament, but there's more major tournaments coming out every single weekend on Grand. And one thing about that is that putting a lot of fishing pressure on these fish. A lot of these fish are getting beat up. The guys are fishing right now, and they're fishing over the weekends. There's also just going to be other guys that are fishing in these tournaments. So it's not like these are the only tournaments. The Redcrest isn't going to be the only tournament going out of there. I'm sure there's other tournaments that are going to be going out on Grand. There normally are, especially Saturday, Sunday. So it could get pretty crowded out there with other boats, and that could also be a factor out here as well. Yeah, and that's what you're looking at here is like you're looking at quality and not quantity. March, there's 2 months in Grand that produce quality fish. March is one of them, and the other is early June when those fish first start moving out to the breaks and the ledges. Those are the time of year that you catch the quality fish. Everything else, they sort of go away a little bit, and the weights go down, way down after that.
Yeah, and guys,
or the weights across the board go down.
Yeah, and for guys who are wondering how are these guys catching these 20-pound bags of fish? I mean, we have a little bit of time, so maybe we can kind of dive into that and talk about what's happening now. We've talked about kind of what we think is going to happen, but like in March, water temperatures at probably March, Randy, that was around when that big snowstorm was hitting. So it's probably water temperatures were probably 40, mid 40s, maybe high 40s, somewhere in that range. Mm-hmm. Would you kind of agree on that?
Yeah.
And what a lot of guys are doing out here, guys, on Grand to catch them, these big bags, is one of a couple things. One is you can just get into some of these shorter pockets off the main lake, and there's a bunch of boat docks. And you can literally just pick up an Alabama rig. And if you run windblown docks with an Alabama rig or a jerkbait on these shallower cuts in the clear end of the lake, or even just back into some of these major creeks and just cover a ton of water, you can catch fish. And depending on the luck of your day, you might be able to pull up and catch some nice fish. It's kind of more of a luck of the draw of which stretch you hit, your timing and all that stuff. But a lot of guys, they just get on banks and just throw the A-rig. It works. And you could also do the same thing with just a spinnerbait. Pick up a spinnerbait or a wiggle wart or a rock crawler crankbait and just burn the banks. And you can catch them on Grand doing that. It's not super hard. What I find, Randy, that a lot of guys are doing, and I've heard about this, guys who are catching them on Grand now, if you want to be consistent, what they have is they have guys who plant brush around certain boat docks. There's certain boat docks they have brush on, and what they'll do is they will pull up onto those certain docks with brush that they know are set up right on like a channel swing or in the perfect location, just like you talk about, Randy, knowing exactly where those key points are, like this is one of those key pre-spawn points. Pulling up, knowing exactly where that brush pile is, firing an A-rig or a jerkbait over the top of those brush piles. And if you can hit enough of those brush piles next to boat docks that you've planted or you know where they are, you have a really good shot of catching 20 to 23 pounds. To do that, you have to know where a pile of brush piles are. And I think a lot of guys go into the tournaments with unrealistic expectations thinking, oh, I can just go out and hammer 23 pounds of fish in one of these team tournaments and I have just as much of a shot as these other guys. That is false. You do not have just as much of a shot as going and catching fish as a lot of these guys. Not necessarily because these guys are better anglers than you, know how to fish any better than you. Sometimes some of these guys just kind of lucked into it, to be honest. I don't know how often it happens, but it happens quite often, more often than you think. They just luck into a little stretch that has them. But the guys who are consistently really good, they put hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 hours on Grand every single year, planting their own brush, finding the best banks, and they fish this like year after year after year, and they know where all these key stretches are. They know how to run them, how to rotate them. And a lot of guys who go catch 23 pounds on a lake like this, Randy, these team tournaments, they might not be able to go one lake down, let's say to Lake Hudson, and catch them worth of crap because they don't know this lake. They haven't put the time in to figure that lake out. And I saw that all the time fishing local tournaments. Guys pick a lake and they're really good on Grand and they know all about it. And there's nothing wrong with that by any means, especially guys who want to be really good on a certain fishery. But if you're just getting into tournament fishing, just getting into team trails and stuff like that, you have to remember that the guys who are dominating consistently have a lot of time on the water. Either planting their own brush, they put a ton of hours on the water to learn all the key little stretches, or which parts of the lake are more productive on certain types of days, all kinds of stuff. And if you're just going out there with no practice or like a day of practice, you're so far behind the eight ball and at such a disadvantage to these other guys who put so much more time on this lake that you shouldn't set your expectations to go out here and like win a Nichols tournament. That is not a realistic goal for some guy who's maybe fished a tournament for a year or two. Would you agree with that, Randy, and kind of maybe elaborate on that?
Johnny, you hit it completely on the head right there. You could not have said, I couldn't have said it better myself there. To not just at Grand Lake, but any of these lakes that have these big team tournaments on it, you got guys that they simply spend all their time there. They know the subtleties of these lakes, just like a couple of the guys at Grand over there. Let's see. Pilcher and Warren, they're famous down there. They own so many boats on Grand Lake. Guys know the lake inside and out on an intimate level. I mean, they just know it. They don't have to get out there and fish the obvious like everybody does. But it's just like the cove I showed you guys with the secondary point in there. Here's the problem you have in a big tournament like a Nichols tournament. Yeah, there's a lot of fish in those places, but if you'll go in there and there may be 10 boats in there when you get in there. So you have to decide, okay, do I want to get behind a row of boats and just haphazardly fish down this bank? You can't win like that. You may pick up a fish here and there, but those are the guys that fish like that are in the 100th, 115th place. In order to win those tournaments, it's just like Johnny said, you have got to have isolated brush where you know it's at. You got to have rock piles that you know where they're at, nobody else knows. You've got to have subtle things that you can run and gun to catch those type of bags there. You cannot catch a 23-pound bag at Grand Lake just slopping down a bank. You can't do it. I mean, it's maybe during the week or something, but you can in a tournament with 300 boats in it. So that's sort of the reality of tournament fishing like that. You've got to have a perfect day. You've got to execute perfect, and you've got to have something special going on. You got to have a special bait, a special pattern, a special area, because it just doesn't happen as easy as what you think. I mean, the average fishermen that are down there like in the 150th, 170th, 200th place, they're just going down the bank fishing like everybody else. That being said, this tournament coming up, the MLF Redcrest down there, you can't fish it like it's a Nichols Marine tournament because you simply are not going to get enough bites to win down there. I mean, these guys that won the tournament, I'm sure they probably wouldn't have done any good at all in the MLF tournament simply because of the numbers there.
Yeah, they probably got 5 to 8 bites a day, most likely. I mean, we could be wrong. They could have caught a ton of fish, but that's pretty normal on grain when you really hammer them. And the other thing too about all of that, guys, like just to give you some background, like when I was talking about, I was fishing all these tournaments on, Lake Dardanelle, and I never went and planted my own brush. I figured out early that I couldn't keep up with the guys who were fishing brush piles because all those guys would go out in the middle of the night, drop their piles on brand new brush, and as you know, Randy, a brand new pile dropped in the lake is going to be way more effective than one that's been sitting there for 2 years. So if you can get a green pile that no one has fished or touched on a spot that no one is fishing, you have a big advantage there. So what I always do is I look for shell beds. So like I won several different tournaments on Dardanelle fishing shell beds, and that's something that no one was really looking for, and it was naturally occurring. But I had to put in so much time. And fortunately, I had the ability when I was younger to go out and, after work or whatever, I could go over there, drop the boat in, idle for 2-3 hours. And that's all I would do. I would just idle for 2 or 3 hours, and all the money I'd make, I'd just pay for gas and go do that. And I was fortunate I could do that. But I just put a ton of time in, and like one of the areas that we found was like one of these areas off one of these random points. It looks like nothing on the map, but I just graphed it, found a big shell bed, hammered them. No one else was around it, but it took me 20 hours of graphing to find one shell bed. And you can do that if you're a local on a lake. The guys who are fishing this Redcrest don't have the time to do that either. Now, some guys might get waypoints from guys during the off-limits or during the non-off-limits period. This lake has been off-limits forever now, so they couldn't do that. But also some of these guys are just locals and just know these lakes really well. Like Edwin Evers, he probably just put enough time on here where he knows where a lot of these good spots are. But even then, if he's not on the lake, he might have 1,000,000 brush piles marked. But it's not just knowing where all the 1,000,000 brush piles are. It's knowing which of these coves or creeks has the fish in those brush that are ready to fire and are in that position. The only way you can keep track of that is if you're on the lake nonstop. And that's what it takes to consistently do well in these big tournaments. We're kind of got away from the Major League Fishing part of it, but like guys like the Warren, the Dennis Chad Warren, like they're just known. Those are the guys, right? Warren and Pilcher, those guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. They are
always... John Pilcher and Kurt Warren.
Yeah.
I think they finished 40th in the tournament. They're down like 40-something.
Oh, they're 40th. Oh, okay.
Which they usually win about everything down there.
Gotcha. Oh, yeah, there we go. Kurt and
Pilcher, Kurt Warren, John Pilcher.
So these guys, like those
guys have dominated on the lake.
They know all about it, but still, they still finished 43rd. These guys are some of the best guys in the lake, and they only had 4 fish for 14 pounds. So look at that, Randy. 4 fish for 14 pounds with a 5-pounder. They're 1 5-pound bite away from being top 10. So that's how narrow those margins are. And they could have potentially done that. So it's crazy. But no,
here's the thing about it. It's like, I've always said this. I've noticed this the last couple of years is that, okay, if you took the Redcrest guys and you put them in this Nichols Marine tournament, most of them would have gotten their butt kicked. I mean, they would be scattered all the way through the field on there. And this is sort of off to the side a little bit. The Nichols Marine Circuit is a good example of what we're talking about as far as the skill level across the board. The skill level amongst circuits like the Nichols Marine Circuit or the Toyota Series Circuit I fished, or even like a BFL even, there is no there's no separation in the talent. The weight it would take, I don't care if you put the Bassmasters Classic or the MLF Redcrest on lake, and then you put like a BFL or a Toyota Series, there's not going to be any difference in the weight. No, the guys are not that better. Just what you consider AAA anglers, professional anglers, what you consider pro anglers, are no better than the AAA anglers today, or even like the Nichols Series up there. The weights prove it. I mean, you can have that debate, but we have gotten so good. Everybody has gotten so good, and they've learned the skills so quick, and the information is so accessible out there. There's no daylight between the talent. There's a perception that there's a daylight. Just because somebody says, well, I'm on the Elite Series or whatever, that doesn't make a difference. The talent level is still the same between the two. And that's one of the things I noticed on tournaments like the Nichols or the Toyota Series like that.
Well, that's
the perception is in the public eye, but it's not the reality of it.
It's interesting you say that, because I think that for some guys, maybe the if you could put like Jacob Wheeler on the same lake as some of these guys who know the lake really well, they might even beat Jacob more often than not because they have that lake experience. What I've noticed though is like there's some guys who actually fish the Major League Fishing now and they fish the FLW Tour stuff like that. So you have your Spencer Sheffields, Stetson Blaylock. He grew up like 20 minutes away from me. You have Evan Barnes, and then you have Dylan Hayes. You may have heard those names. I grew up fishing against those guys on Lake Dardanelle, and they were like in my area. They were just local guys. They weren't even dominant at the local level, honestly. They weren't even as good as some of the guys who were really, really good. But what they did is they got really good at fishing a lot of different bodies of water. And I think a lot of guys who fish the national circuits have a different skill set where they've put their time and experience, for example, not being just good on Grand Lake. A lot of these guys who are really good at these Nichols tournaments, they only fish Grand Lake or they only fish a couple lakes in the area, and that's what they're good on. And they're really good on Grand. But if you take them away from Grand, all of their experience they've gained, how fish behavior works, all that stuff, like Grand, big deal is gizzard shad, good big deal is brush pile fishing. That's not going to serve you super, super well if you come down to Lake Ouachita. Brush pile fishing is a little bit of a deal, but a lot of it, you have offshore grass now, you're dealing with standing timber, you have the brim bed bites, it's a completely different deal. Then you take those guys off of that, and let's say you take them over to the Arkansas River. And that's the reason I think a lot of the guys who grew up in my area, where there's several pros that are, just maybe, 5, 6, 7 years older than me that are, fished in my area and stuff. They went on to do it, and, I was fishing with them. I was competing against them back in the day when I was, younger than them. But, like, basically the reason that a lot of these guys are good, Stetson Blaylock finished second in the Classic. He fished a bunch on Lake Ouachita, Lake Hamilton, Lake DeGray. These all kind of fish somewhat the same to an extent. But then you also have the Arkansas River over here. You go down over here, you got Millwood Lake, which is more like a bayou-style lake over here in Arkansas. Then you have these shallower lowland lakes like a Lake Nimrod. You have Lake Dardanelle, which is kind of river-ish, not so much of a river system lake. So you have all these different fisheries. You even have the smallmouth lakes over here with Greer's Ferry. So you have all these lakes in this general area in this central Arkansas section where you can learn how to fish so many different ways and become well-rounded. And I think that's what it really takes to be a consistent traveling pro, is having that well-rounded background. And honestly, guys, if you're wanting to chase that as a dream, or like say, hey, I'm, 40 years old and I want to try to go fish the Elite Series, because there's guys who have made that switch when they're 30 or 40 or even 50 years old to go do that. The trick is there's a couple of guys who were, I'm not going to name names, but they were sticks on Dardanelle. They guided, they did great. They were hammers on Dardanelle. They won almost every single tournament. They then went to the regional level. They did okay. And they went to the national level and they did terrible because they had to fish all kinds of fisheries. They had to fish the Great Lakes. They had to fish down here in Florida. And they weren't able to adapt their skills from Lake Dardanelle to other places just because they learned Dardanelle so well and they weren't able to overcome that. So that's the thing that is interesting about like the Major League Fishing format even, is that these guys a lot of times are going to lakes that they're not really that familiar with. They go to random lakes. They have like a day and a half of practice and they just have to roll and go off their instincts. And I think that a lot of the guys who fish these bigger tours now, they're way better at fishing the moment, fishing the instincts, than any guy who's out here on like a Grand Lake. Because the guys on Grand, they just say, I know what's going to happen. I'm just going to do it and stick with that. Versus the touring pros, they know how to adjust more. That's at least my rant. What are your thoughts on that, Randy?
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. But one of the things I think you can do is you could take some of the top anglers on the Nichols circuit at the Nichols Trail out there, the guys that know how to win, and if they had the desire and the passion to do so, they could be successful anywhere across the country. If you know how to catch bass, you know what it takes to win tournaments. It's not that big of a feat to duplicate that in other waters. The problem you have is most people don't want to travel. Most people don't want to, be away from home 6 months out of the year, traveling like a gypsy around the tournaments. That's the thing that makes a pro fisherman or not. I'll use a prime example of my mentor I had growing up, Terry Thomas. A lot of you guys know Terry out there. Terry I've never been around anybody, including guys like Clun, who I fished with a lot, that knew how to win like Terry Thomas did. He was a master at understanding how to catch quality big fish, and he won tons of tournaments throughout the Ozarks for 30 plus years. The only reason Terry didn't, go out and become famous is he didn't want to travel. I mean, he just wanted to stay around Missouri and fish. But anytime we had a tournament where Denny Brower or Biffle was in, he beat him every single time. And that's the thing that makes professionals versus just your AAA local sticks successful, is just that drive to either want to travel or not. And I know we a lot about, like with you, Jonny. I mean, I'll tell you guys right now, Jonny would be a superstar professional angler if he chose to do so. But it's just like, it's just like a lot of us, you just don't want to travel around the country, everywhere, stay in strange hotels, driving, 50,000 miles a year across the country.
Well, I might think I might be a little bit of a unique case in the sense that I always have enjoyed fishing all kinds of stuff, and I feel like I'm very versatile. If you guys watch my YouTube channel, I always am catching fish on all types of bodies of water. I focus on offshore fishing, but I'll catch them in the grass, clear water, dirty water, doesn't matter. So I feel like I have a well-rounded idea. And also for my YouTube channel now, I have to go out and catch fish every single time I go fishing. Like literally, I post every fishing trip I ever go on. If I catch 2 fish, I post a video about it because I have to. That means I'm not really even fishing that much. If you guys think I'm fishing a ton, I'm fishing a lot less than a lot of you guys probably think, because it takes long with the videos. But like, I have that pressure of going out every day and catching them. So I think that is helpful in that. But at the same time, like, I think that there's a difference. I'm going to push back a little bit on you say, Randy, in the sense that I don't know if all these guys who are hammers on Grand Lake, like let's say the guys who are finishing and only fish Grand Lake and they're really good, I don't think those guys could go onto the Major League Fishing Tour and compete. I think they would get destroyed, because I think a lot of these guys who are good on Grand, they know where their brush piles they planted are and where the community holes are, or where the secret stuff is they put hours in. Now, if you get a local or regional pro who's really good in the BFLs on Table Rock, Beaver, Grand, comes over here, fishes Keystone, maybe fishes Gibson, 10 Killer, and he can be good on all of those lakes, yeah, like a regional guy, definitely he could go and take that. But like, if you're not good on all these lakes, if you're only good on Grand, probably you're going to get destroyed any other tour.
Yeah, there would be a learning curve with that, but there's something about fishermen that I think that good fishermen, they just have a knack at it. You can't really describe what it is. It's almost like you need a work ethic to be a good angler too, and you got to have an appetite to learn. But there's an element that is hard to define about people that can find fish. And Jonny, you're a prime example of it. I mean, somebody that can just go out and roll out on a lake and find fish. I mean, I think that the people that do well in tournaments have that intrinsic ability within inside of them. I don't know what it is, but I've noticed it. Some of the guys I know that I've fished around forever, they work harder than anyone I know. They live it, they breathe it and sleep it, but they're just not that successful. It's almost like they don't have it. It's almost like somebody is born good. They're an art. You're either born an artist or you're born good at math, or you're not. It's something that's hard to learn. And I think that's the way it is with fishing a little bit.
Well, I think part of that too
on that level.
Yeah, and I think part of that is growing up with it. Like, I know Jacob Wheeler, like, I literally fished against him in several junior world championships. He was older than I was, but, like, we fished these tournaments, and I met Jacob when I was like 11, and Jacob was like 15 or something like that. That was the first time I met Jacob, and he's just eaten up with fishing. He loved every minute of it, and he was fishing nonstop. He was fishing since he was young, and he had some good mentors and stuff where he was at. But the thing is that with Jacob, he started so young that I think that you see that with a lot of young phenoms. Like, if you think about like a Tiger Woods started when he was super, super young training. You got the tennis people like Rafa Nadal, or like the soccer players like Ronaldo. Those guys, playing, I don't know, it's harder with like football, but I'm sure there's some basketball examples and stuff in there too. Steph Curry, his dad was in the league and they've been playing basketball since he was tiny. When you have those skills developed young, like I started fishing literally as much as I possibly could. I was fortunate. My parents took me to a little creek by my house almost every single night after school for like 2 years. They would go there, and my dad would wade the creek with me or my mom, and I just fished for smallmouth bass out of a creek. I probably spent 250 days a year fishing out of that creek. The only days I wouldn't go out is when it was literally frozen over. And that was only in Wisconsin about 100 days out of the year. And the rest of the time I had these insulated waders that we got. And I would be out there in the snow on the banks, and the river was still running. And I'd be in my waders, and the water's like frigid. And I'd be out there still fishing. I just loved it. And I think that part of that, just getting in the creeks, learning how to find the fish in those creeks, learning how to find fish in the ponds, I was just eating up with it. And those skills translate as you get into a lake. You just kind of have this intrinsic knowledge. And I started fishing tournaments when I was 8 years old. So like I was in the boat with anglers, I was co-angling, I was all this stuff, and I've learned what people do and how they do it. And that, all of that accumulated knowledge and then taking it and, you know, living it and breathing it, that makes you better at just going out and finding fish. And that's where I think I have an advantage. I actually watched a great YouTube video. It was I'm getting into workout stuff recently, and I'm going to switch over to the main topic, our main thing, because I think this is super, super fascinating. But basically, it was this guy, and his whole YouTube channel is about being like above average. And I'll link the video down in the description if you guys are interested. And this is not related to the Major League Fishing stuff, but I thought it was interesting anyways. Basically, what he was saying is that he was like a biker, he did all this stuff, and he wanted to get like 6-pack abs. That was his thing. He was like a 50-year-old guy, and he's like, I want to get a 6-pack. I finally saw these guys on the internet doing this stuff, and he wanted to do it, and he did it. He tried and tried and tried and got down to the point where he could get a 6-pack, and he realized his body just didn't work genetically to give him a good 6-pack. His body wasn't set up for it. And he's like, the guys who are on Instagram or YouTube that show off their 6-packs, they're there because they're genetic abnormalities. They're people who are like not normal. They've either put extra time in when they were a kid or something or other. And everyone you see who's on social media, who's popular, who's successful, there's something about them that makes them unique from everyone else. And a lot of times that's just the fact that, like, for myself, I've been fishing since I was super young, tournament fishing. I built up a ton of experience when I was very, very young that most people just didn't have. Most people probably on this stream have not fished as many tournaments as I have by the time I was 16 years old. I had like over 200 tournaments under my belt before I was 16. So like that's pretty rare for somebody, you know, my age. So that really helps make me a better fisherman and to explain. But if you go watch my videos, you'll think, oh, he's just some guy, he doesn't fish professionally, he's an 18-foot boat and he just goes fishes. And I can go catch fish like him. And then maybe you try to do it and you don't succeed. Or you watch another guy who's, you know, looks like he's just some average Joe, but you don't know their background. You don't know where they're coming from. And the people who rise to the top of social media, rise to the top of all these things, or even these fishing tours, they have something special about them. Whether one thing he was like is saying, you know, maybe they have the ability where they didn't have to work. Maybe they had money, family money or whatever, and they could just fish all the time. Or they had a really supportive family, or they had a really nice job that allowed them to fish 3 times a week and still work. Like, there's all these things that can lead to someone being really good at something. And I think that it's good to keep that in perspective. And I really like that perspective from the video is like, you know, anything you do, you have to, that you see on the internet or whatever these popular people you see, you have to keep in mind that usually there's some reason that they're there that you can't replicate yourself. Do you get what I'm getting at, Randy?
Absolutely. And what you said about, you know, learning the basics as far as when you're done, even like learning current, how, you know, creek wade and that type of stuff is critical. And it's also critical to spend time with other good fishermen. You can learn a lot from YouTube and from social media and that type of stuff, watching fishing programs, but there's nothing that replaces, and in my experience anyway, is getting in the boat with a good angler and just watching them. I mean, that's what I learned so much from fishing with Aaron Martins over the years. I mean, Aaron would talk to me, but it's only when we were in the boat together and you could see exactly how it's done that a light comes on in your mind and said, man, that's, you know, I get it now, you know. So that's a piece of advice I give you guys, man. Try to fish with good anglers. That will help you quicker than anything, especially if they're masters at a specific technique. I mean, just the time that Jonny and I have been together, you know, when I watch him graphing, you know, I learned so much just in a little bit of time watching how he did it versus me doing it by myself from what I learned about and read about. So,
Yeah.
so
Oh, and by the way, Hookem Jim says that anyone get a six pack. I understand you get a six pack. The point of it, I was kind of trying to talk about. He ended up getting a six pack, but it didn't look like the guys on the internet. He compared his six pack to the guys who were looked like freaking Hercules Adonis with the perfect chiseled six pack. Like his was kind of like wonky and wasn't not perfect, and it didn't look like he wanted to. So he got to the point where he could get a six pack. Like his body fat was 10% or something. So he had 10% body fat. Like he was lean, and it just didn't look like he wanted to. So that's the whole idea. And it was part of it is probably because he hadn't trained enough when he was younger. There's a whole story behind it. You have to watch the video for it to make sense. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that it's important when you're getting into tournament fishing or doing anything, and this is a big tangent off of what we started the topic on, but just don't get so worried if you set these expectations that you want to go win a local tournament or you want to be this great local angler, be super successful and stuff like that. Because sometimes it's just the cards are stacked against you. Some guys, I know one guy, Randy, that was really good back in Lake Washita. I remember that I heard the story and we were always like, why is this guy so good at fishing? He won every single Lake Washita tournament, ever. We counted up, he was 70% of the Lake Washita tournaments he would win. We're like, how is this guy this good at fishing? Is he just that much better than us? But literally his boss at his job would pay him to go fishing for him. The boss would say, I will pay you to go fishing 5 to 6 days a week so that you are always on fish so that I can always be on fish. So that when I go fishing on Saturday, I always go catch him. And then the guy would go fish tournaments on top of that. So he literally had a boss paying him a job and all of his gas and everything just to stay on the fish farm. He was like his own personal fishing guide. And that's why he was so good. And it's you would never know that if you just didn't know the story. But that's a crazy story.
Yeah.
So, anyways, so Randy, back on topic a little bit with the Redcrest. I guess I want to get your prediction on who you think might win it. I know that there's some Major League Fishing pros. I don't know if you know all the guys in there. Let me pull up the field here. I'll pull up the anglers and just kind of.
Yeah, let me see the field if I can see it. I don't even know who's in the thing.
Yeah, I'll pull it up here. Okay. So here are the anglers. This is Group A. So we got all these guys here. Zach Burge stands out from Oklahoma. John Cox.
I can't see the screen there.
Oh, let me share. Sorry, I need to share it for you too. There we go. Let me pull this up. Oh,
Mark Davis Cox, Dudley.
There we go.
Man, I think out of that group right there, I think that I've got to go with Brent Chapman. Out of Group A there.
Okay.
I know Brent really well. He knows how to fish Grand. He's really good in the pre-spawn.
Even over Evers? Evers Classic Champion in March on Grand?
Yeah, that's true, but I mean, he doesn't. A lot of the stuff that he knows, everybody else knows it now. I mean, I don't think he fishes the lake that much just for fun or on the side or anything like that. And he's going to do well for sure. But Brent Chapman is really good at a chatterbait and shallow cranking, that type of stuff. And I think that combo could be very well for sure.
I'm calling John.
My
Cox.
pick out of that group, I go for Cox. Yeah, you can't go wrong with Cox. Yeah,
I think Cox is going to figure it out. He was leading after 2 days of a really tough grand, after 3 days of a really tough grand tournament. So we'll see there. Okay, so your pick is Chapman out of this group, though. You said.
Yeah.
Okay, Brent Chapman. I got John Cox. I don't know. I have a good feeling. Or Evers is hard to pass up, and then also Zach Burge is pretty good in that. Elam also fishes. James Elam is also fishes Grand. He's a local. So there's a bunch of local guys in this. It could be dangerous. They threw all the locals, it looks like, in the same group, which is really nice of them. In this group, I could see Jordan Lee having a really good tournament in this one.
Jordan Lee, yeah, that's a little bit tougher one to pick right there.
Thrift,
man, I think I'm going to have to go with Sweet Pea Strader on that one.
Oh, going with spinnerbait straighter. You're going old school picks. You're going.
He's good shallow. He's good with the spinnerbait. He's good with the shallow crankbait, a flat side. I definitely look for him to do well.
Van Dam.
I don't think there's going to be I don't think there's going to be enough live scope fish for Jacob Wheeler to dominate like he has been that late in March. Obviously, Van Dam's got to be a good pick there. The way Van Dam fishes, he covers a lot of water. He's going to be shallow cranking. That's going to work. He's going to be a tough pick, but I'll go with Sweet Pea Strader.
Okay, so we got Strader. Man, this is a tough one here. I don't know. I'm trying to find this YouTuber here too, so we can get that. Because I think some guys were asking about whose guy's name was, but no, I could see that. Andy Morgan is tough too. I mean, shallow water guys. There's a bunch of good shallow water guys. Do you think there's any chance he gets one live scoping, Randy? Any chance?
I don't. No, I think that if it was a 5-fish limit, I definitely think it could get one live scoping. I don't think there's going to be enough fish setting up like that to win in the MLF format. I mean, I think it could definitely be one like that on a 5-fish. But there's, like I said, if it's not one shallow cranking and jerk baiting, I was shocked. By just somebody that just burns the bank covering water.
Got it. Okay. Well, we are going to see. I give it a 70% chance that Live Scope wins it, and then we got a 30% chance of something. I'm just kidding.
I would ask that. I mean, believe me, everything's getting won by it. I wouldn't discount it completely.
For sure. By the way, for those who are wondering about the YouTuber I was talking about, his name is Mark Lewis. The channel is just Mark Lewis, Lewis. He's literally just an average dude. I don't know why YouTube just recommends stuff. And he's just he was really overweight, and then he started running 5Ks, and then now he's like an ultra distance marathon runner, and he's got some good stuff. It's just good down to earth. I like good down to earth people, Randy, who don't like to they tell you the way it is. That's the type of people I like to be around, where it's like, this is the way it is. And, there's a bunch of people over here who go crazy one way or crazy the other, and people who are down the middle. That's kind of my, that's my speed. I don't like to get too worked up one way or the other. So, I don't know. I'm not saying that he knows what he's talking about. I'm not saying he's an expert on anything. So I'm not trying to promote his channel to say oh, he's the best at something. I just thought he had an interesting point in one video. But that is not, I don't know about any of our content. If he has any other crazy stuff on there, I apologize. I watched literally one video. So, no, don't hold me accountable if other stuff he says on there is factually incorrect or anything
so
that.
So the MLF, they take half the field to the championship? That's pretty generous.
Yeah. How many people are in it? Yeah, they take 40, I guess. So it's 1, 2, 3,
dang.
7.
I figured there'd be only 20 in it.
Yeah, so it's 20. It looks like it's 41, and I think there's 8. Yes, they take half of it to Redcrest. It looks like, I don't know. I think there's 80. Is it 80 guys? 100 guys? I don't know how many guys are in Major League Fishing.
There's 80. I don't think there's 100.
So then maybe they take half the field. So it's pretty good chunk, half the field. I don't know. It should be interesting. I'm excited to see how it goes down. However it gets won, Randy, what I will tell you is I'm going to go out the week after, and I'm going to go do a little breakdown of the actual spot, the actual pattern the guy used to win. Yeah. So it's so close. I'm just going to literally go out there and hole jack them, basically. Go to the same spot where they caught him and then talk through it and see how that goes. I think that'll be be good.
Sounds good.
Let's see here.
We've got our Toyota Series tournament down there the last part of April.
That should be interesting too. Grand's going to get so much pressure, so by then it might be a little bit tricky.
There's a big Anglers of Action Championship the week before that, and then the Toyota Series. And
the Nichols is April 6th also, so you get the Nichols at the beginning of the month.
Nice.
Good deal. Well, guys, that's pretty much all we got for you. It's we went all around, talked about Major League Fishing, talked about expectations for tournament anglers, talked about life lessons from people that I've watched on YouTube. I don't know. We went all over the place, but hopefully some of the information was helpful for you guys, and you're able to learn something from the stream. And we are going to be back next week. I don't know what we're going to be doing for the stream. That is to be determined. I got to figure that out. Actually, I take that back. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to be on vacation, so I will be probably out of pocket, not being able to do the stream. So I'm going to take a break next week, Randy, and then we're going to be back at it the week after that. So we're going to have a 1 week break, and then hopefully we'll have some good stuff. We'll probably be breaking down the Redcrest, and we'll probably have you back, Randy, and we'll see if our picks were in. So you guys aren't going to see us again until after Redcrest, and we're going to be able to say, I told you so, or I don't know, should we have a bet on it, Randy, about who is the closest? I think actually that's a great idea. For Ozarks to here, I'm going to mark this down. Randy, if your pattern is the winning pattern, then I'm going to have to go out and you're going to do a challenge with me where you can fish with anything you want, and I have to go fish a Blaukat old school jig all day. That's all I can throw. Blaukat old school jig against you.
I'll fish the moment offshore jig if I lose. And
if you lose, I'm going to raise this up since you're putting your years of grind experience. If you lose, you have to go live scoping with me for an entire day. You're running the live scope. You're going in the boat with me, and we're live scoping the entire day. That is your punishment. We're going to go live scope on Table Rock.
That'll be the only time you guys see me live scoping if I lose that.
Okay,
we'll do that.
Fingers crossed that I picked a winner so we can see Randy struggling with live scope, but if not, then you'll be seeing me flipping the jig in 2 foot of water.
Yeah, there you go.
Good deal. Awesome, guys. Joe with the Woo Pig Suey, what is up? Joe, go Hogs. So, guys, we are going to be back sometime here in the next, not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. So we'll see you guys here in a couple of weeks. Hope you guys have a great week. Enjoy the hopefully good weather in your area. All these big pre-spawn bass. Put some big fish in the boat. We'll see you guys very soon. Thanks for joining me again, Randy, and everyone have a good night.